Welcome back to Lake Effect on Hunters Bay Radio, 88.7 FM. It's Jason Harnett. I guess you could say this is our Canada Day edition as we head into the big day, July 1st. Canada 150. Can you believe we're that old and still this good looking? We have another great guest here, and he is from the Dr.Norman Bethune Memorial House. He is the manager. His name is Scott. How are you, Scott?
Hey, Jason. How you doing?
Pretty good. Hey, I've read this. Best known Canadian in the world.
Yeah.
Statistically,
Sure.
that's what they've said compared to Dr. Norman Bethune. I don't know if Justin Bieber might have something to say about that
He
now.
might be up there, yeah.
Yet, that is a statistic that a lot of Canadians, a lot of Canadians still don't know who Dr. Norman Bethune
and
is.
he's probably the most famous Canadian outside of Canada. He certainly is. In Canada, I mean, I didn't learn about him growing up in school. I don't know if you heard about. I would have known his name. I think I knew he was a doctor. Had something to do with China before I really looked into him. Maybe 25 years ago. But he's become more well known in Canada, certainly in the last couple of decades or 3 decades. The site's been open for 40 years, so that's done something certainly in the local area. Yeah. But he's still most famous for 22 months he spent in China at the end of his life.
I have to plead a bit of ignorance. I mean, I've been called even on the show. I've said, I know that Dr. Norman Bethune's homestead was here, but I honestly, I don't know a lot about him. Yeah. I'm a little bit ashamed about that. That's why I've went there since then, and that's why I've
done your duty
in the studio as well. Talked to Colin, who works at your facility. Sure. Amazing historian, lots of details and facts about Norman Bethune. And it's like living in Niagara Falls and not going to visit the falls. So
well, and people do that everywhere. I worked with a guy once who was an engineer in Egypt, and he lived just 10 miles from the pyramids, and he said, I never got to go to them. I always meant to through high school. I went to university. I transferred out of the country, never went back, never saw them. We often miss gems that are in our own local area. You take people there when you have guests up, but you might miss the awesome stuff in your own area.
All right. Well, here's some of the research. We'll get your comments, your thoughts, and get you to elaborating on some of these things. So he had a sister and a brother, 2 parents, missionaries. His father was a priest.
Yeah, he was a Presbyterian minister in town. His first posting was at the Knox Presbyterian Church in town here, and that was the manse that they lived in. That's actually where Bethune was born in 1890. So.
A decorated veteran, one of Canada's first soldiers.
Sure. Yeah, he was did 3 tours of duty in the First World War and one of the first to enlist.
Colin gave me this comparison. He was one of the pioneers, MASH, the television show where people they set up medic camps on military bases, and he gave me that comparison. But he was one of the pioneers in this sort of thing.
I mean, there were kinds of MASH units centuries earlier, but this kind of modern, set up a tent, do surgery under it. His idea was you got to bring the medicine out to the people. I think his first tour of duty in World War I, he was a stretcher bearer. So you can imagine the violence he saw at Second Battle of Ypres, people dropping everywhere. And most of them were dying because of loss of blood. Wow. And so he's seeing that we can't get doctors out to them. I have to get them on a stretcher, carry them back. They're not making it. So over his career, he's gradually learned to get the medicine, get the blood, get the doctors out to the battlefront.
Speaking of blood, he was he was the originator of a mobile unit, a transfusion.
Right. He had one of the very first ways to move blood out, and his brainstorm was look at a milk truck, and he says, well, milk keeps the milk cold, it moves it around, so he bought a truck. When he was in the Spanish Civil War, he volunteered there with quite a number of Canadians actually, and they got this blood truck, got a fridge, put the blood in it, moved it out so they could transfuse the blood right there. People thought it was a miracle. People watching it in Spain just thought this is amazing. People coming right back to life.
A thoracic surgeon. And so I had to dig a little bit deeper into that. The lungs, and specifically
chest,
he worked with trying to help with tuberculosis.
That's right. You have to remember that was one of the biggest killers at the time, that everybody knew someone who had TB or were dying from it themselves. And a lot of it was tied to poverty. He said that it's not just the people who get sick are the ones who are poor by and large, or at least they're the ones who die. If you get TB and you had money back then, you might live. Now, interestingly, Gravenhurst had TB sanatoriums here, and we had the first free sanatorium in town. So it's another connection to TB here. He decided that he had to help these people whether or not they had money, so he'd have them come to his apartment to treat them. He ended up getting it himself, not surprisingly, from treating so many people, but he survived it.
there's such a long list. So I'm trying to get to
so many
everything here.
angles,
I mean,
yeah.
healthcare. He believed in bringing healthcare for everyone.
Yeah.
Some at that point maybe accused of being a communist for having that sort of mentality. But look where we are today.
Sure. I mean, if you had a health card back then, a public health card, you put that down on the table, people would think that's a communist thing. That whole idea that, you go in and you don't pay for doctors. Well, he said, why should people pay for doctors? They're getting milk at the price of jewels. They need it to survive, but we're charging them what they should be paying for jewels. So doctors, he said, shouldn't be making a profit from illness. And he pushed that. He wanted to see a free healthcare system, starting in Quebec where he was living at the time, and then moving on to the rest of Canada. But it didn't start till after he died, till Douglas was able to pull it through.
You had mentioned he was very concerned with the poor. He was concerned about those fighting in battle. He joined the Chinese army to help during the Japanese invasion.
Right.
He was the only foreign doctor there.
Yeah, and that's where he became most famous. That's why his name stuck around. They always say to us, and we still have Chinese come to visit us, and they're saying, we're so grateful to Canadians. We want to thank Canadians because he represents Canada. I've had a number of families come to me and say, I brought my family to Canada. We moved here because of Norman Bethune. We thought if you guys in Canada are like what he is, if they're as kind-hearted as he is and generous, that's where we want to set up our family. To me, it's amazing to have families come and to this day say, this is why we're here. Well, they bring flowers to the site to thank, and it's not just to thank him, but to thank Canadians.
Yeah, I mean, I was over there yesterday, and a lot of Chinese visitors were there, and I mean, they consider him a hero.
Yeah, it's still immensely popular story in China. Everyone grows up to this day. So for the last 60, 70 years almost, they've been learning about him in school, but I don't want people to get the idea it's just a Chinese story. It's a Canadian story. This guy spent most of his life in Canada. He did more tours of duty for Canadian military medical services than he ever did for other countries. But China's where he got his fame, where he was recognized for generations, where everyone who went through school had to learn about him. So they come back to Canadians and say, hey, you got to learn about this guy.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that is one of the biggest questions. Why aren't we as excited about our hometown hero, our national hero, as our foreign friends in China?
I wondered that for a long time. And one thing that's always struck me, do Canadians kind of like to put our toe in the sand and say, oh, well, we just did what we did. We don't want to take too much credit for it. He was just one guy. We're certainly critical of him, and the site does that. You would have seen when you went through the site that we don't pull punches. We show all his imperfections because he was as imperfect a hero as any hero can be. Yeah. But Canadians tend to shy away from a lot of pride and that kind of thing. Maybe that's some of it.
We do. This is the year, if you haven't been to the Bethune Memorial House, to go and check it out, especially if you live in Gravenhurst. This is something that you need to go out and check out and be an ambassador for our town and share with others and around the country, because this is a birthday year.
Yeah, we get more excitement from our local visitors that come and say, why didn't I learn about this before? So for Canada 150, we've been trying to solve a couple of problems. We wanted more things for kids to do. We said the kids need a place to run around and burn off steam. And we also wanted to show a bit of the story about what he did in World War I, how he was a stretcher bearer and then a doctor. So he was in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. Show that story. So for Canada 150, on July 1st, we're unveiling this, probably Gravenhurst's only battlefront World War I trench.
And it's very cool.
I spent this week stringing up fake barbed wire and placing rubber rats around it and all the things to make it look like a real war trench.
We even have the rain and a little bit of the mud.
But, we've been trying to ship in the mud as much as we can, make it look real. Now, it's a great spot for kids to sort of get a little bit of a taste of what it looked like, what it felt like to be there, and run around too. And, they learn by playing, so we can bring that in too, but a medical battlefront system, so you can see what environment a lot of medical heroes were in back then.
So the public are invited to come and check this out this weekend.
Yeah, that's right. We're free at basic admission all 2017 for Canada 150. But on Canada Day, we got umpteen things going on. We've got just some general entertainment. We've got, speaking of wildlife, I should say, coming to do nature talks about Canadian animals. We've got a magician. We've got games and crafts for kids. You can get airbrush tattoos, not permanent, mind you, but airbrush tattoos if you want to show how proud you are to be Canadian. You can get some Parks Canada symbols in an airbrush tattoo, and then unveiling that World War I trench.
Oh, and what time does this all start, Scott?
10 o'clock, 10 till 4.
And you're on which street in
We're
Gravenhurst?
at corner John and Brown.
and you just look for that beautiful house, which you also get an opportunity to go through.
That's right.
with your
It looks
pass.
like it did in 1890. It's restored just the way it looked when he was born there, right down to the kind of food on the table.
I must say, you have to check out the fireplace in that home.
Yeah.
The master fireplace, it is unbelievable. I like fireplaces. That one is unbelievable. I'd like to see if it still works, but fantastic. And of course, the museum. And this is a national treasure here, right in Gravenhurst. And we encourage you to go visit and talk to Scott and all of the great staff that he have there to get you up to speed on how important this man is.
Sure, and see who the most famous Canadian in the world is and see what he has to do with Gravenhurst. Kind of another reason to be proud to be from Muskoka.
Scott Davidson is the manager of the Dr.Norman Bethune Memorial House historical site. It's Dr. Norman Bethune's hometown. He was here. This is where he was born and lived for 3 years, and right here, and you can check it out on Canada Day. Lots of great activities. Thank you for coming in today.
Hey, thanks very much, Jason.
Happy Canada Day to
Happy
everybody, and we'll see you next week. And 88.7 FM is the dial. Check us out every Wednesday morning at 11:30. Bye for now.